the series. Got probably 3 more lessons to go to be done with all the main ideas I want to talk about. But this morning, we're journeying through Peter's message again this morning. This message was probably written about the early 60 AD. It was written to a group of Christians around the Roman Empire, in remote regions of the Roman Empire in Asia Minor that we call it today. We're letting these words and the messages of Peter's letter inspire us. We got to wrestle with a lot of things that he talks about. Like, what does it mean to be a people in our culture, in our world, in our society, when we're called to be different? When I was growing up in elementary school and intermediate school, this is going to sound like I was, but my kids don't have this experience. The kids that I taught didn't have this experience. So I guess I must be a tweener, but that's okay. When I was in elementary school and intermediate school, we had report cards, right? Yellow manila folders, report cards inside. You take it home, parents got to sign, you got to take it back the next day. Did anybody ever have that same? Okay. All right, so I'm not alone in this. We didn't get our report cards digitally. We didn't go online to see our grades on a instant by instant moment. We got an actual report card. It was in an envelope. You carried it home. You got to have your parents sign it. It was proof that you showed it to them. They looked at it and they approved, or didn't approve, but send it back to you with you to school the next day. But I remember on those report cards, there was a point or a category on those report cards, and this is not mine, by the way. But you got cooperation, you got dependability. This is all under what? Citizenship. So we got a citizenship grade, and they got all these things. Cooperation. This was similar to what I was used to. It wasn't my exact one, but got a citizenship grade. You look at all that. I mean, this was a fantastic student right here, I'm telling you what. But I just wanted to point that out, right? You got a citizenship grade. What I thought in getting these report cards from the teachers, and you're like, man, I really don't know what they're going to put over here. This is all subjective, arbitrary, right? I thought I was nervous, right, on the citizenship part of my evaluation as a student on my report card, because I didn't know what they were going to put. Most of ours was S for satisfactory, right? We got an S for that. We didn't have this A, B, C, D grading on citizenship, but we got an S for satisfactory, or something else for you were unsatisfactory. Yeah, you are an S. That's correct. That's what I had. And yeah, I definitely did not want a U on my citizenship grade because, academically, I was an A, B student, not knocking it out of the park by any means academically, but I did my homework. I did the work that I need to do to get good grades academically. If I made a C in something, my dad and mom wouldn't get really mad. They would just be like, are you applying yourself? Are you doing the best you can do? Then, it's fine, but just do your best and everything will work out. But always, when it came to citizenship, the subjective part of that grade really was hard for me to swallow that. But the point of this story, I know it sounds random at the point, but the point of this story is that my teachers growing up and my parents at home were not just satisfied with my ability to answer questions on tests and write good essays. That wasn't the end of their expectations of me. They expected me to behave in class. I mean, they expected it, but the way I want to say it, they demanded it. It was not an option. You're going to behave in class. You got to be orderly. You cannot be an agent of chaos at school.
Go back here.
The same is true for us as followers of Christ, don't you think? It's not enough to have perfect doctrine and the right answer to all the biblical trivia questions or situations that come up. It's not enough, right? Our Father in heaven and our neighbors that we live around, right? They expect us to live in an orderly manner. Citizenship. Rather than being agents of chaos in our cities, in our states, in our nation. Citizenship matters to the Lord. It matters to the people that we are around because we're trying to influence them for Christ. Influence them with the gospel. And you can't do that when you're not being a good citizen, being an agent of chaos. Let's listen to the way Peter puts it in chapter 2 and verse 11 in 1 Peter. He says, "Dear friends, I urge you as foreigners and exiles to abstain from sinful desires, which wage war against your soul. Live such good lives among the pagans that though they accuse you of doing wrong, they may see your good deeds and glorify God on the day he visits us." Peter starts by reminding these Christians of their true identity. They're strangers, they're exiles and foreigners in this place where they are, but their citizenship is in another kingdom. Paul, in his letter to the Philippians, emphasizes that, again, this same concept. Your citizenship doesn't lie here on earth. It's in heaven with God. Your primary citizenship, your primary allegiance is not here on this earth. It's in heaven with God. And that's where you belong. It's in heaven. You're citizens of the kingdom of God. And he starts there by reminding them that they are citizens of another kingdom. You're still called to be good citizens in the world in which you're living. Even as you're surrounded by people that don't believe in what you believe in, they don't share your faith in Christ. But he's challenging them. He's calling them. You have to live good lives. You got to have lived upright, moral, virtuous lives. Don't be led astray. Don't be led around by your sinful desires. Got to have some self-control, he says. But more than that, he also says, put on display good works. Do some good things in the place where you live. Do good deeds. Do good things in your city so that those people that don't share your faith, they see what you're doing. And when God shows up, they're going to be thankful that you did that. And they're probably going to try to, poke holes in your efforts, harass you, persecute you, XYZ on down the line. But because they cannot argue with your life and how it goes, then the good deeds that you're doing, citizenship matters. Okay? Citizenship matters, Peter says. And then after he says this in chapter 2, verse 11 and 12, there's 2 or 3 more sections in the book where he explains what good citizenship looks like in a number of situations. And those situations are specific to their situation there in the first century in that remote place of the Roman Empire where they're living. We're not going to read all those situations this morning. But if you read or you're skimming through what we're talking about, you're going to see a word pop up over and over and over and over and over again. And that word is submit there's some connection Peter is making between submitting and being a good citizen. And submit is a loaded word in our culture. We've talked about it when we were in Ephesians. I mean, submit came up quite a bit. Submit comes up here in 1 Peter. Our culture has a charge put to that word. It's not always a positive charge. Sometimes that word has a negative charge attached to it. As Americans, we're not very good submitters. We like it when other people submit to us, that's for sure, but we don't like it when we have to submit to other people, and we're not very good at submitting with each other. So, but next time, my next lesson, I'm going to go into more detail about how Peter is describing how we should submit. This morning, I'm not going to get into submit as much, but I'm going to hit on a topic this morning of politics, which you're going to be like, what are you thinking, mister? But I'm not doing it. Peter is doing it. Okay? Peter's doing it. I'm flying up here giving you the highlights. So let's go and read what he has to say here. We read it this morning before the lesson. Submit yourselves for the Lord's sake to every human authority, whether to the emperor as the supreme authority, or to governors who are sent by him to punish those who do wrong and to commend those who do right. For it is God's will that by doing good you should silence the ignorant talk of foolish people. Live as free people, but do not use your freedom as a cover-up for evil. Live as God's slaves. Show proper respect to everyone. Love the family of believers. Fear God. And honor the emperor. All right. We're going to dig into this just a little bit here this morning. For Peter, part of being a good citizen, right, and the world that they're living in, he's saying, you got to submit to the governor. You got to submit to the emperor. You got to submit to Caesar. Peter has this idea in his mind that if you're a good citizen, you aren't causing any trouble in your society, you're trying to submit to those who have authority over you, you're actually going to build credibility among your neighbors. They're probably going to want to say negative things about you and what you're doing. They can't poke holes in your life if you're submitting and doing what the established order of the day is saying to do. My assumptions is that when Peter wrote this letter, the emperor in Rome was Nero. I don't know a lot about the Caesars and emperors of Roman history in the first century. I don't. But I definitely have heard the name Nero. And there's a reason why I've heard the name Nero. History recognizes this guy as vengeful, as power hungry, as corruptive, as deeply immoral man. This guy, and from where I'm from, is a rascal. Okay? That's what I would have been told this guy would have been like from where I grew up. He's a rascal. You see, unlike today, back then in the first century in the Roman Empire, they didn't necessarily have an explanation for their political leaders to be decent human beings. Wasn't a requirement, right? But we've raised our standards just a bit, I would guess, where we have expectations on how these people lead and hold these offices. But Nero was a rascal in every way imaginable. Peter says, you need to submit to that guy. Nero, who later set fire to the city of Rome, the same city that he's the emperor of, he sets fire to the city, blames the Christians, and then he sets fire to Christians and watches them die for entertainment. Peter says, submit to that guy. Nero, who will be Caesar when both Peter and Paul, the apostle, are executed in Rome. Tradition says that Peter was crucified upside down because he didn't feel like he was justified in being crucified like Christ. I'm going to do it upside down. And Paul was beheaded in Rome on Nero's watch. Peter says, submit to that guy. The question I would love to ask Peter about what he says in this passage is, if you would have known what was coming. I'm assuming that this was written a few years before, right? The persecution that's getting so crazy. Assuming you wrote this a few years before it got really bad for Christians in the Roman Empire, if you knew what was coming, would you still say that? Say what you said? Would you have spoken of the emperor in such a positive tone? Just behave yourself, respect authority, and everything is going to work out the way it's supposed to. Would you have said that, or would you have your message been a little different? Maybe sound a lot like John does in Revelation. Right? John describes Caesar as this grotesque, hideous beast coming out of the sea, in alliance with the dragon, who must be resisted at all costs. Would you have changed your mind just a little bit? Just a question, just a question. My mind's racing, reading this and kind of making sense of it. But after reading it and giving it some thought, I don't know if he would have. But one thing I do know when I compare what Peter says with the other voices in the New Testament, the other stories throughout the scriptures, is when he says to submit to the government or the governing authorities, he's not saying to obey everything that they say, no matter what. There's a limit, right, to submitting. We don't have it on the screen, but in Acts chapter 5, right, Peter is in a situation where the religious authorities in Jerusalem are telling Peter and the other apostles to stop preaching because you are causing too much trouble in the city. And when they say, be quiet, no more Jesus, it's Peter who speaks up in verse 29 and says, we're going to obey God rather than man. Okay, so he's not really falling in line here. So there is a limit to his submission. There's a place for civil Christian disobedience. Okay? There is a place for that. Even if it leads to suffering and even if it leads to persecution and death. Jesus was crucified in part because he was refusing, right? He refused to submit to the religious authorities in Jerusalem. Right? He was also crucified because he submitted to the power of Rome to crucify him. There are limits to submission. But when we resist, there's a price to pay. But in this particular text that we're reading this morning, 1 Peter 2, Peter says, as much as you can, you need to submit. And as much as possible, without compromising your allegiance to Christ, submit to those that have authority over you, including that rascal Nero. And his rationale for doing this isn't because Caesar has the ultimate authority. It's because in the first verse of what I were reading this morning, verse 13, submit yourselves for the Lord's sake. Submit for the Lord's sake. You hear that? Submit for the Lord's sake, because it's the Lord who's really in charge. You're free in Christ, but don't use your freedom as an excuse to be a knucklehead. There's another West Texas word for you. Don't use your freedom to be a knucklehead. Jesus is Lord. That means Caesar isn't. But that's not an excuse to live in open rebellion against Nero, against the governors, against their political structure of that day. Peter says you got to find a way to live within that structure. You got to be a good citizen. And And there's a mission-minded, evangelistic approach to that, I have found. The motive for submitting. You're not submitting because it's going to give you more power. The motive for submitting is so that you can be a good neighbor in your society, so that you don't lose credibility with your neighbors, so that they take seriously what you're teaching them about the gospel. Because there's some line in the early Christian, this early time frame that Peter is warning them. There's a line that can be crossed, right? Where that government's just going to just get rid of them. And now what do you have? There's no one sharing the gospel. So Peter's calling these Christians to walk a fine line between living as free like Jesus is Lord under the lordship of Christ, and yet still trying to fit in as best you can in this society. Be a good citizen, because they're honoring God and they're establishing credibility of the gospel when they do. One of these challenges for us, though, is when we read a text like this and we try to apply it to our time, our situation. We live in a radically different situation. Our political system is different. Our situation as Christians are different. It is radically different than what we are reading right here in 1 Peter. The Christians to whom Peter is writing had zero political power. None. They were not powerful. They were not a voting bloc that had any sort of power at all in their government. Zero. Caesar did not have to worry about offending these people, because they're going to not reelect him for the next. Not a thought. He could treat them however he wanted to treat them. It didn't matter that it came time to reelect Nero for his second term. Oh man, we got to worry about those. It wasn't a thought. Okay, didn't even think about that, because Christians didn't get a vote. There was no voting. If Christians didn't like living under Nero as the emperor or any of the other Caesars, they didn't have the opportunity to wait 4 years, go to the voting polls, and get somebody else in there. They didn't have that opportunity. They were stuck with him and with whoever else was in there. And while we as Christ followers are called to submit to authority, called to respect those that govern us, our relationship to our elected officials, because we live in a representative democracy, is vastly different than what we're reading in this passage here. Vastly different. We get to give our opinion. We get to vote. We get to have a conversation with those people that we're electing to those offices. We get a voice when we vote. We have a right to free speech. We can peacefully protest when something isn't going right, when an injustice is going on. We can speak out against something that we believe needs to be addressed. We can advocate for better legislation, better laws, so that the common good of all mankind gets addressed. We are a part of that conversation. We're a part of the process in a way that the Christians in the first century, zero chance to do any of those things. They didn't have a say, but we do. And so for us, 2,000 years after this text was written, or so, 2,000 or so years, for us being good citizens in our society and submitting to the political process and to the structures of our day is very different than it was for them. We have to engage in politics in a Christ-like way. We're still called to be a part of it. We're still called to participate in it, participate in it respectfully, but for the sake of the Lord. For the credibility of the gospel. We have, as Christ followers, engage in politics in this way. That's why I think politics is a hard subject to talk about, is because as Christians, you can't just do whatever anyone else is doing. We live in another nation. Our citizenship isn't here. This is a beginning point for us as Christians. As good citizens, we're going to be involved in politics. But just like, but as Christ-like citizens, we have to do it in a Christ-like way. We have to do politics Jesus style. Okay? Quote unquote, Jesus style. Because we follow Jesus. What does that look like? What does that mean that we're going to do politics Jesus style? Well, I've got a few ideas for you and it will be done for today. First, I know I've heard this said in many different ways, but I'm going to say it this way. To do politics Jesus style means keeping our political engagement in the proper perspective. There's a story in Matthew chapter 22 where there's religious leaders that come to Jesus. They're trying to trick him and trap him, right? Their question is, should we pay taxes to Caesar? They say. And they know if he says yes, then he's going to lose a lot of credibility with a lot of the first century Jewish people in Jerusalem, because he will be a Roman collaborator. He's siding with the enemy. But if he says no, then the Romans are going to, this guy's a rebel. You need to discipline him. So no matter how he answers this, yes or no, he's going to be in trouble. They've got him in a trap. But Jesus sees this trap and he navigates his way through this by first asking if they have a coin. Right? Do you have a coin on you? Oh yeah, we got one right here. Here it is. They present it to him. Whose image is on that coin? He says to them. Well, it's Caesar's, of course. That's what they say. Just in that one example, right, that he's caught these Jewish religious leaders in hypocrisy because of the loopholes in their law. Right? Their law says you cannot have coins with images of people on them in your possession. It's a violation of the second commandment, right? It's an act of idolatry, and yet they've got it with them right there. He doesn't point it out in the text, but he's catching them in this situation. He's clever. So he catches them in this hypocrisy. Since you've got this idolatrous coin on you, then whose image is on it? And they tell him, well, it's Caesar's, of course. So then Jesus says to give Caesar what's Caesar's and give to God what's God's. Whose image is on the coin? It's Caesar. Okay, it belongs to him. Give it to him. But who bears God's image? Right? Who bears on it? Well, human beings do. Human beings bear the image of God. Well, you give to God your love with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength. Right? So Caesar has his image on a coin and he wants it back. Give it back to him. Throw it at him if you want to. It's his. But God has put his image on humanity. He's put his image on you and on us. So give yourself fully to God. That's what Jesus is doing in this teaching. It's not the same. It's not some ancient version of the separation of church and state, like some people want to say about this particular point of text. But Jesus isn't saying, now what I want you to do is I want you to have dual citizenship. right? I want you to keep your involvement in church and in politics separate. That's not what he's saying at all. What he is saying is establish a political priority. Understand your relationship with Caesar, your relationship with the state, and understand that relationship is second. It's secondary. It's not your first primary relationship. Your allegiance to God, because you are the bearer of the image of God, is your primary allegiance. The first Christians were not Romans who just happened to be Christians. Okay? Their primary allegiance was to the kingdom of God. And they were Christians who just happened to be living in the Roman Empire. So in the same way, we're not primarily Americans, right, who just happen to be Christians on the side. We're not primarily Republicans. We're not primarily Democrats, which I don't know if I'm speaking to any this morning, but if we were, we wouldn't necessarily be primarily Democrats or libertarians or independents or whoever else you want to be. And then you go to Christian meeting on Sunday, right? We're fundamentally, primarily citizens of a different kingdom, the kingdom of God. And our political allegiance is secondary to our allegiance to God and to Christ. This means that rather than trying to force Christ into an agenda of a political party, we as followers of Christ are called to submit our politics to Christ's agenda. His agenda is way bigger than the Republican platform. It's way bigger than the Democratic platform. It's bigger than our government and its constitution. Everything else is secondary to that citizenship that we hold with God. So in order to do politics Jesus style, we have to remember that Jesus is Lord. And if Jesus is Lord, then America is not. Caesar is not. The Republican Party is not. The Democratic Party is not. Our own political preferences are not. Jesus is Lord, and we got to keep our priorities straight. And that's how you do it. We follow Jesus first, and then we do politics. Second, to do politics Jesus style means exercising power under. And I've used this in our idolatry series before. It's the same concept. Jesus style means you got to exercise power under, not power over your neighbors. In Mark 10, where Jesus' disciples are jockeying for position, right? I'm going to be the greatest. They're wanting power. They know the kingdom of God is coming. And so they're wanting positions of power over the other disciples. And the other disciples find out about it. And Jesus shuts this whole argument down, right? He says in Mark 10:42, you know that those who are regarded as rulers of the Gentiles, they lord it over them, right? They lord it over them. And their high officials exercise authority over them. Not so with you. That's what he says. He's getting in the middle of this argument. He's not so with you. That may be the way they do politics over there, but that's not how we are going to do it here. Instead, he says, go back. Instead, he says, whoever wants to become great among you must be your servant. And whoever wants to be first must be a slave of all. For even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many. This is a political text in Mark here. It's about power. That's the point. They're grabbing power. And Jesus' disciples want power, and they want it over other people. And Jesus says, That's not the kingdom that I'm building. I'm not building a kingdom of power grab. He says, I don't come to exercise power over others. He says, I come to love and to serve and to sacrifice for the sake of others. My power is under, not over. And that's what separates God's kingdom from every kingdom on the face of this planet. And Jesus says to his disciples, this is what we're going to do. In my movement, there's going to be no power over. There's going to only be power from under. You're called to love, you're called to serve, and you're called to sacrifice for others. Not fight always to get your way. This means we do politics Jesus style, right? It means we have to resist the temptation to always act out of self-interest. It's hard to do. Politics in its very nature is all about self-preservation. That's what it's all about. So it's very hard because I want someone to represent my interests. I want somebody to look out for the welfare of my family. I want somebody to look and do things for my community, my nation, my particular party, or my particular way of life. And to do politics Jesus style means we have to have power under rather than power over. And rather than trying to preserve my power or gain more power for myself, I needed to deny, right, to others what I demand for myself. I'm going to deny myself, and I'm going to put the needs and interests of other people above my own, especially those that have less power, less influence, less opportunity than I do. Even when I vote, I wouldn't always vote out of self-interest, in other words, but I would vote out of the needs and interests of others in mind. It's tough. Part of what it means to do politics Jesus style is to exercise power under rather than power over. And finally, you need to treat almost everyone with kindness and honor and respect. Is that what it says? Repeat after me. Everyone, right? That's hard. I am light years away from being able to do that. We got to do politics Jesus style. Means we got to treat everyone with honor and kindness and respect. Even those who disagree with us, even those who don't share our faith or our political convictions or points of view. Because everyone, no matter who they are, they're a human being, they're created in the image of God. Just like the Assyrians we were learning about this morning. And if we can't change their mind politically, then we have to be good citizens, right? Treat them with dignity, treat them with honor, treat them with kindness and respect, and we just might get the opportunity to influence them with the gospel and Jesus Christ. And we just might have the opportunity for them to take us seriously. So what is our number one priority? What's our priority here? Our number one priority, is it to change their minds politically? Is that our priority? Or is it to influence them for Jesus spiritually? What is our priority? What's our number one priority? That's what the first Christians were able to do, right? They were able to influence their neighbors for Jesus spiritually, even when they had zero power. They had no power. All they had was power under and live and be good citizens. The history of the church, the first 3 centuries of its existence, it's a fascinating and an amazing miracle in my mind that happens on the world stage of history. Christians over time were able to influence their neighbors to become Christians, not by compromising their faith, not by compromising their ethics or their political agenda, but by being good citizens. That's how they did it. They loved their neighbors, they loved their enemies, treating everyone with dignity, honor, respect, and over time, they won people over for Christ. They had 0, not 1 ounce of political power. So, likewise, let's try to emulate these Christians we read about here in 1 Peter. May the Christ-like quality of our citizenship in this city, right, in this county, in this state, in this nation that we live in, our participation in that whole process, may it enhance the credibility of the gospel, right? How about that conversation for a change? Rather than undermine it. So the way that we do politics, right? May the way that we submit to the political process of our day in a Christ-like way. May the way that we do politics win more people to Jesus because of maybe we're learning or maybe we need to learn how to do politics Jesus style. Let's stand together and sing this morning.